Now, preview time.
Welcome to our second Peplum part of Look, Look and Look Again. In our last little episode of Look, Look and Look Again, we predominantly featured the escapades of Machista or Hercules or Hercules, of course depending on what part of the world you lived in. In the UK, the films were shown because posters I've seen feature a U and A certificate, meaning that they were and did play to some of the cinemas around the United Kingdom. However, I would imagine they would have fitted in a Saturday matinee double bill for children. They just simply didn't catch on over here. Although the whys and wherefores are unknown, maybe we treated and saw these as children's films, and based on the fact some were cut and censored, were put out and marketed as such. So as well as Hercules, we were introduced to other demigods and joined in their adventures too on screen. In the USA, cinemas were drenched with a host of Italian and European imports, bringing with them a legion of heroes who have amazing feats of fortitude and ensuring wrongs were righted and the pure were always protected. Goliath, Ursus, Perseus, and a host of gladiators clashed swords as the oppressed, spearheaded by the titular character, overthrew the oppressor in an act of machismo liberation and vigour. Periods in mythology and Greco-Roman history, even biblical, were brought from antiquity to screen. Some were adaptations of the classics or inspired by, and some purely created for the thrill-seeking audiences of the early to mid-1960s. These brought action, adventure, lavish sets, usually left over from bigger productions. Bearing in mind we're making Peplum, and Peplum was done on a budget, and of course special effects galore, courtesy of matte paintings usually, and over-enthusiastic set designers. But you can't knock them. Some effects are well executed, others less so, but should be applauded nevertheless, because you can see the effort that's been put into these little nitpicks by the production crew, and due to the archaic nature, as it seems to us now, some of these effects weren't half bad, and a bit of a spectacle. Carlo Rambaldi, who created E.T. and Alien, was responsible for the Medusa creature in one of my favourite peplums, Perseus l'Invincible, or l'Invincible. Wherever you're watching in the world, you have to forgive my pronunciations, because some of them probably make you laugh, but nobody can knock me for not giving it a go. Anyway, Perseus was played by Richard Harrison, another sword and sandal star in contrast to his muscle mag days. And as we see in Richard Harrison's case, if you've got it, flaunt it. And in his case, he has ample. A batch of varied mythological-based films considered inappropriate for cinema release were in fact syndicated for television. The films were edited, dubbed, and done the rounds on TV in America under the Sons of Hercules umbrella. Some of the Ursus, Perseus and Goliath movies had only been screened in Europe and had not made it any further, unlike the successful Hercules films. These myths of our distant past made it into living rooms across America, adding and heightening the appeal, which by now had reached Peplum fever pitch. The Sons of Hercules had a little catchy theme tune that no doubt had children racing in from outside, breaking off from their role play of gods and monsters to witness their heroes come to life on the small screen. And they were also plunged into ancient chivalry from ancient times far, far away. By 1964, Sword and Sandal was beginning to wane, and Hercules and co decided to retire to Olympus for a long rest. By this stage, the Peplum was getting outlandish too, as Hercules was popping up all over the place, facing off Zorro and parodying itself. When something parodies itself, you know it's going to bow out very soon. Check out Doctor Who in the late 80s. That was a foregone conclusion that was going to finish with as it ventured into more parody, sort of parodying realms of comedy, to be honest with you. So that wasn't very good. Anyway, the movies themselves still continued on TV syndication, but the films themselves still continued to play in drive-in theatres up and down the country in the United States during the 1970s, really, and quite well into the 1970s. Here they began to achieve somewhat of a cult following. Recent movies and recent times, such as Gladiator, Alexander and Troy, are modern-day Peplum, which fluttered briefly and really, when we look at it, aren't Marvel's franchise, their feast of superheroes, and arguably TV's exemplary Game of Thrones. Yes, I'm a fan. Do they not really follow this epic format that can be traced back to 1914's Cabiria, with lavish sets and fantastical elements, wowing audiences now as they did then? You know, these plots, feature the good guys combating the nefarious, patronizing the precious, creating their own mythologies that pamper to the machismo of most men, and inspiring all genders and ages. Most frustrating for something so beloved as the Peplum, the DVD and Blu-ray releases vary in quality and in availability. The best prints of these unsung heroes are on German, Italian and French label releases, but alas, it pains me to say, some do not feature English subtitles. Fans of the genre, check out YouTube's Peplum TV if you want to see some of these films, but as I said, the quality does vary, have taken these prints and, using the English dub, has made a fan dub, so we nearly get to see the films as originally intended, and the spectacle can be enjoyed by English-speaking peoples. UK releases remain virtually non-existent. Now, there's a surprise, but the satellite station Movies for Men in the UK has screened quite a few, alongside spaghetti westerns and some unknown Italian war films as well, which also, I've noticed features the stars of the Peplum. However, although Movies for Men do screen these films, they aren't Whistle and Bells quality, which is a shame. It's also a shame to think that some people, as I said before, think that Jason and the Argonauts and maybe Clash of the Titans in 1981 are considered to be the only classics of the Peplum genre, which is a tragedy, Greek or not. America, Peplum's second home, for want of a better word, if we consider that Italy is its first, they've done relatively well with regards to the film's releases for home entertainment, but there again, one plays Russian roulette with the films in terms of quality at times. mean, some of the films that I've picked up play in black and white, where the colour has been wrung out of the well-worn print used for the release. These are mainly ones used on bargained basement copies. Some prints play as though they have been unearthed in a tomb in Rome and rinsed and cleaned up via a washing machine, with the sound seemingly has been recorded through a teapot in a sandstorm itself. So that gives you the idea of the quality of some of these movies. Another confusing thing is, of course, the variety of titles the films have been distributed, and for those non-attentive collectors, they may find themselves purchasing a few copies of the same movie, but the less expensive, more than likely, will be the shittier version. It really is a pity, and I feel it's disappointing these gems haven't been networked on TV more in days of yore or recently. I would rather be treated to Sword and Sandal than Harry Potter consistently. I mean, Harry Potter are good films, but after seeing it a 40th time does wear off the novelty. So, okay, let's look again at the films themselves, and a bit of information to put them into a better perspective and understanding. Also, with regards to these films, if you should want to seek any of these movies out, actually, get the title from what I've put on here, from the clips that interest you, key it into YouTube, and YouTube itself, without the Peplum TV channel, makes plenty of these Peplum available. Just search for the title. But there again, as I've said, and as you can see from here, because some of these have been sourced from YouTube, the quality of the print is very, very varied. I guess we can start with the Hercules movies, which ran from 1957 to 1964. So we had Hercules in 1957, also known, as we said, as La Fatica di Hercule in Italy, swiftly followed in 59 by Hercule e la Regina di Lydia. Hercules Unchained was its anglicised name. This followed. This was followed by Le Vendetta di Hercule, which came next in 1960, but was marketed as Goliath and the Dragon. It's also known as The Revenge of Hercules. Mark Forrest filled Reeves' toga in this one. Hercules faced the Hydra and then helped the captive women in 1961. And after he helped those ladies in distress, he then went into the haunted world, which is one of the best of the Peplum, an absolute classic directed by Mario Bava, where Sword and Sandal gets all gothic. Marvellous stuff. Hercules then went for a little sojourn in the Vale of Woe, and which also cropped up in 1961, which was made as a semi-comedy, but without the laughs. I found it rather woeful, to be honest with you, pardon the pun. Ulysses versus the Son of Hercules was in 1962, and after that this led us into The Fury of Hercules. Hercules, Samson and Ulysses got together in 1963, and then Hercules faced the Moloch 1 year later and saw greasy quiffed Gordon Scott clashing with a hound-headed fiend. Don Vardis played Hercules the Invincible in 1964, which was part of the Sons of Hercules movies for TV syndication, where it was known as Son of Hercules in the Land of Darkness, but that's coming up in a short while. The Triumph of Hercules followed it in 1964, and 65 saw poor Hercules taking on Rome in Hercules Against Rome. Hercules then went Inca as he went through a wormhole. Not shown, but how else could he go back to that period in time? And he ended up against the Sons of the Sun. After brawling with the tyrants of Babylon, in 1965, a TV series pilot called Hercules and the Princess of Troy was made and quickly disappeared. Hercules the Avenger came along, but was a TV quickie, cobbling the captive women and haunted world films into one featurette. Some of the other Hercules adventures were not Hercules movies in their native Italy and were marketed to cash in on the initial success of the Hercules brand. Now that's how you milk success, viewer. Now, the Italian Machista films ran from 1960 to 1965. Kicking this lot off was Machista in the Valley of the Kings, also known as Son of Samson, with Mark Forrest coming up against the evil of the pharaohs and baneful biblical banality. I quite like this one as a peplum. Yeah, very good indeed, this movie. Anyway, after his stint with the pharaohs, Machista entered the land of the Cyclops, also known as Atlas in the land of the Cyclops in 1961, with Gordon Mitchell taking the lead. Machista then entered the court of the Great Khan. This is known as Samson and the Seven Miracles of the World. A first foray into horror was Machista versus the Vampires, which was in fact a Goliath movie, and in another contender, in my opinion, as a premium example of the genre. The Strongest Man in the World followed that, but was retitled rather snazzily as Hercules versus the Mole Men for TV, and sounds much better for it, as you watch Machista sling albinos over his shoulder. Machista went through the Veil of Woe, faced headhunters, and then went to hell in another favourite of mine, Machista all'Inferno in 1962. That was followed by the triumph of Machista, and then Machista versus the Monster was made in 1962, where we go back to the Stone Age for this instalment. Machista had a stab at comedy in Toto vs. Machista, part of comedian Toto's series of film. It kind of is a carry-on peplum, but is about as funny as a fire in an orphanage. Machista then became the world's strongest gladiator, faced a sheik, become the world's greatest hero, God he's busy, battled Zorro, the Queen of Samar, and went down King Solomon's mines. And then he bounced into the court of the Tsar, become a gladiator of Sparta, battled Mongols, Genghis Khan, went into the Valley of the Thundering Echo, after meeting up, of course, with Samson, Hercules, and Ursus. The last Machista outing was 1965's Gli Invincibili Fratelli Machista, the Invincible Brothers Machista in 1965. And then last but not least there was Machista il Vindicatore de Maias, Machista Avenger of the Mayans in 1965. But this was a very cheaply made Machista film, and it was made up mostly entirely of re-edited stock footage from two older Machista films, Machista contro i mostri and Machista contro i cacciatori di testi. It is extremely scarce, since it was never distributed in the USA and was apparently never dubbed into English. So, Ursus. Ursus was a superhuman who featured predominantly in Christian Roman mythology and pops up in the novel Quo Vadis. As a Christian, he is at odds with himself, as the peaceful teachings of the faith he has clashes with his strength and his violent ideals at times. So this character of Ursus was used and adapted as the hero of in a clutch of Italian adventure movies of the 1960s. Ursus was referred to as the son of Hercules in several of the films when they were finally dubbed into English, although in the original Italian versions Ursus had no links to Hercules whatsoever. Just to confuse matters, in the English dubbed version of Hercules, Prisoner of Evil, Ursus is referred throughout the film as Hercules. I told you it was complex. So Ursus had 8 outings in total. There was that silly comedy one where he's involved, but I'm not going to include it. because it's pretty shit anyway. So Ed Fury played him in 1961, and Ursus's first outing featured a bizarre cult kidnapping young women, including Ursus's fiancée Attilia, and of course he gets pissed off by this, so he goes for the jugular and tries to rescue her and right the wrongs. Then Samson Burke, aptly named, took over the role to seek revenge in the second Ursus film. After retribution was justly carried out, Ursus went to the Valley of the Lions and then involved himself with a Tartar invasion in 1962. He then returned from the Land of Fire and became a rebel gladiator, weren't they all? And faced the terror of the togas in 1964, which kind of blended lycanthropy, another bizarre element to combat in this saga. After meeting other heroes in the silly Samson and the Mighty Challenge film, Ursus took his final outing, played by Alan Still, in 1964's The Invincible 3. Samson, or as he's known as Man of the Sun, he pounded himself from the pages of the Hebrew Bible, making his debut in 1961, where Brad Harris joins a bunch of rebels to regain the kingdom of Sulan. 2 years later, in 1963, Samson faced off a sea beast, played by Kirk Morris, and Hercules decided to challenge Samson as well in another movie, and then Samson faced the Black Pirate and ended up in a satire entitled Samson and the Mighty Challenge, which is one that we don't look at because we looked at it first time round. Samson also appeared in 6 other movies, but these in Italy were originally Machista vehicles.
Goliath was inspired by the Philistine giant in the Book of Samuel, and he appeared in 4 Peplum outings. After Hercules became a blockbuster sensation in 1959, Steve Reeves' movie Terror of the Barbarians was retitled Goliath and the Barbarians in the United States of America. As Peplum was at its height, the film was also successful, and it inspired Italy to produce a series of movies with the titular hero. Goliath Against the Giants in 1960 saw Brad Harris playing the role, and in 1963 Gordon Scott took over for Goliath and the Rebel Slave. In 1964, Goliath championed against the Masked Raider and finished his run with the conquest of Baghdad. Our heroes do get about, don't they? Goliath was later inserted into the film titles of 3 other Peplums and were retitled in the United States of America, but these were purely retitled for the sake of the dollar. Those films were Goliath and the Vampires, Goliath and the Sins of Babylon, and Goliath and the Dragon, which was originally a Hercules film.
There was in fact another hybrid and branch from the Peplum tree, which were the Gladiator films. It all started in 1948 with Fabiola, and it was a 150-minute blockbuster telling the story of Christian martyrdom with the emphasis on lavish sets. And these sets were used to recreate the Colosseum for amazing gladiatorial bouts. Some of these sequences are quite fantastic. So Fabiola kick-started it, and then in 4 years later, in 1952, Sins of Rome was released to the public, and they absolutely lapped it up. So those 2 movies were standalone major influences on the gladiator type of films, and it spurned a whole host of cinema with clout
and films like The Invincible Gladiator, Gladiator of Rome, The Slave, Gladiator 7, The Last Gladiators, and others too, far too many to mention, and you're probably peplumed out by now, dear viewer, but it even continued into 1985 when Lou Ferrigno teamed up with Dan Vardis, who was rather aging at the time, to bring 7 magnificent gladiators to the big screen. So this was also another little genre that spawned many movies.
The mighty sons of Hercules once thundered through the years. These men of steel could never feel the curse of a coward's fears. The mighty sons of Hercules were men as men should be. They worked with dreams and turned their dreams into victory.
And so the theme went, look, there's even a board game, can you believe it? So that was the theme tune to the Sons of Hercules umbrella, which took 14 Peplum films and focused on one specific mythological hero, and then repackaged them for syndication on the small screen. So I've had a look through and researched and provide you with the following. So what I'm doing here is I'm giving you the original movie poster, as you've probably deduced, and flashy uppy the title of what they became when they were repackaged. Some were truncated. It's always best to stick to the originals. It's like looking when we did it, the some of the Russian films, science fiction films, how they were repackaged and resyndicated for the anglicised market, really. And the same happened with these. So if you have the opportunity of seeing the Sons of or the original, always plump for the original. However, you could always go for the Sons of Hercules that were syndicated for a little bit of fun, because they are quite good, and the dubbing gives a very corny approach to these movies. So they can be enjoyed in any shape or form, really. Good gracious, well, we are coming up to the half-hour mark on Look, Look and Look Again, and you can have too much of a good thing. We've covered so much sword and sandal, and I think it's time to break off from fantasy and back to our humdrum existence. But you can't leave things in the air, I hear you say, and I know, my lovelies, I know. So, tune into part 3, where I round off our magical tour, and as a treat, review one of the best from the bunch of Peplum. And as you can appreciate, that's just one of several hundred, to be honest with you, because there's just so many, such a wealth of material, and it is really enjoyable. So we'll round it off and we'll take a look at the Peplum resurgence that happened in the 1980s. And for you out there, we're going to, who's sort of like open-minded, we're going to have a look at some Peplum smut as well, because as well as the more wholesome adventures, their Peplum had an influence on the pornographic. So we're going to have a look at that in part 3. Anyway, until then, may Bacchus bring you bounty galore and pack your horn of plenty. So until then, cheerio.